Good evening, everyone. Let's look over at John 15 again this evening. And it's a great joy to welcome everyone tonight. If you're new with us, we're in a 2-year study of John's Gospel. We covered the first part of this remarkable book last year, the Book of Signs, first section of John's Gospel, chapters 2 through 11. It has a prologue just before that, all of chapter 1, in which Jesus is introduced to us, and then those 7 signs unpack the reality of that introduction. Then the second part of the book, chapters 12 on through chapter 20, deal with just the 1 week of Jesus' life. And then in the middle of that section is really just dealing with one night. And it's this lengthy discussion that Jesus is having with his disciples. And it will culminate in Jesus praying for his disciples. So if you think about the last evening, so to speak, he has with them before he goes to the cross. So he has this opportunity to share his heart with them. They've been at a meal together. He's washed their feet. He has, in the words of John 13, loved them to the end, loved them to the uttermost. And so here in John chapter 15, he's spoken to them about him being the true vine. Not just the vine, but the true vine, which is to say he's the culmination of God's promise to Israel in Psalm 80, in Isaiah 5, and numerous other places. We looked particularly at Hosea last week, where the vine, as the people of God, finally bears fruit in Jesus. The vine in Psalm 80 is cut down, it's broken down, it goes into exile. But then it flourishes again, it's brought back from the dead. It thrives again. So when Jesus says, I'm the true vine, he's saying, in effect, I'm the true Israel. Israel in me dies and lives again. And you are part of this new creation. You are citizens of this new kingdom which is beginning. And this is a kingdom that has a completely different set of values for its citizens. It operates at a very different level. And this is expressed in numerous places in the Gospels. Jesus, for instance, in Matthew's Gospel in chapter 20, listen to Matthew's account, Jesus says, you know the way authority works with the Gentiles, they lord it over people, but it will not be so among you. He who would be greatest among you will be what? Servant of all, least, right? So the servant ethic. He says, even as the Son of Man, highly exalted ruling figure, did not come to be served, which is what you'd expect, but rather to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. So Jesus is introducing to those who would be his disciples a completely different, astonishingly different way of living. And there's a particular fruitfulness, a particular way of viewing this new way of living, and it's summed up in this word fruit. He says, by this is my Father glorified, that you bear much fruit, and so prove to be my disciples. So last week we looked at one dimension of what that fruitfulness is, and we noted that when we come to this week, we're going to be taking a little bit more look at the interiority dimension of that. The fruit, very specifically, of love. Because as soon as Jesus gets done talking about the vine and the fruit that it's meant to bear, he begins to speak of love. So let's pick it up in verse 12. This is my commandment, that you love one another, just as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that one lay down his life for his friends. You are my friends, if you do what I command you. No longer do I call you slaves, for the slave does not know what his master is doing. I've called you friends. For all things that I have heard from my Father, I have made known to you. You did not choose me. I chose you and appointed you, that you would go and bear fruit, and that your fruit would remain, so that whatever you ask of the Father in my name, he may give to you. This I command you, that you love one another. So this entirely new, radically different order is characterized by a new commandment. You remember that from John 13. part of this whole discussion, Jesus says, "A new commandment I give to you." Now, remember, who's the only person who's issued commands to Israel? That was God. So when somebody comes on the scene and says, "I have a new commandment," we kind of pass over those verses. We're sort of used to hearing them. A new commandment. Oh yeah, a new commandment that you love one another. When Jesus says a new commandment, he's again, as is the case particularly in John's gospel, he's identifying himself as God. And he's saying this is the commandment. And the whole law is summed up in this way in the word love. Paul will bring that out in the book of Romans. The whole law, whatever commandments exist, are summed up in this word love. So Jesus says, "This is my commandment, that you love one another." But he doesn't leave it there. He says, "This is my commandment, that you love one another." Verse 12, say the last part of verse 12 with me. "Just as I have loved you." Washing one another's feet, bearing one another's burdens. And of course, this is in view of what's about to take place with the cross. So the way that loving one another looks is not a sentiment or a feeling. It is an action, and it is a sacrificial action. So in our modern and postmodern West, especially because of the Romantic movement, we take the word love and we associate it with a particular set of emotions. Well, of course, emotions are very, very wonderful things. Thank God for them. But love, biblically speaking, is not defined by that set of emotions. It's defined by actions. Love, authentic love, biblical love, the Jesus kind of love, is love which is often contrary to your feelings. You don't feel like forgiving someone, but you do. You don't feel like staying with someone, but you do. You don't feel like being the person who serves, but you do. Why? Because you and I are the unlovely who've been supremely loved. Why does God tell us to love our enemies? Well, Jesus says, when we love our enemies, we are like our Father. In other words, your Father in heaven does what? He loves who? His enemies. And you go, oh, that's a good thing. That's a good thing for the enemies. And well, that's true. The problem is when you say something like that, you may be thinking of other people. All right? But Paul over in Romans says that God loved us when we were sinners. And here's a list of words that he uses over in Romans 5. When we were sinners, when we were helpless, when we were without hope, and when we were his enemies. Enemies of God. And God loved us as his enemies. Right? Now that's not about a set of emotions. That's about a redemptive action that God takes to win us to himself, in which he sacrifices himself for his enemies. So how will people respond to that kind of love? How will people within the Christian community and outside the Christian community respond to this kind of love? Well, let's keep reading here and then we'll kind of turn over to the study guide. Verse 18, if the world hates you. Did you say that? If the world hates you. Isn't that interesting? That just as soon as Jesus says, love one another, the first thing he says is, if the world hates you. So again, I think one of the misconceptions that many Christians labor under is that if they can simply do the right things, if we could be better Christians, the world would be really impressed and suddenly turn to faith. That's not always the case. It's not that there aren't people here and there that are deeply moved by Christian love. There are. But sometimes the world sees the life of Jesus being worked out among the people of God, and it does not respond positively. It does not respond positively to the disciples of Jesus. Now, this is important to contextualize because some people are just obnoxious Christians. I know none of you are obnoxious Christians, and I know none of you know any obnoxious Christians, or would even hang out with them. But but I read a story about 3 weeks ago, and it was online about some evangelists who went into a St. Arbuck's and right. Right, yeah, that's right. So they went into St. Arbuck's, which is a very important Christian scene. It's where many pastors gather to prepare their sermons, and many disciples are made. And so they went in there, and they were kind of open air preachers, and they went in and they started really yelling at people that they were going to go to hell, which is not usually the best approach to evangelism, whether in Starbucks or elsewhere. And one lady looked up at him and said, "I'd rather be in hell than in heaven with you." My. See, that's not an effective witness. That's not really getting the job done. So we're not talking about the world responding in hatred to obnoxious Christians. We're talking, who then probably go back to their companions and go, thank God we were persecuted today, that kind of thing. So what we're talking about is when you really are dwelling in faithful, humble, gracious love, genuine, authentic Christian community that could be very deep. And yet Jesus says the world will hate you. If the world hates you, you know that it hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love its own. But because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, because of this, the world hates you. Remember the word that I said to you, a slave is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they kept my word, they will keep yours too. All these things they will do to you for my name's sake, because they do not know the one who sent me. If I had not come and spoken to them, they would not have sinned, but now they have no excuse for their sin. He who hates me hates my Father also. If I had not done among them the works which no one else did, they would not have sinned, but now they have both seen and hated me and my Father as well. But they have done this to fulfill the word that is written in their law. They hated me without a cause. They hated me without a cause. When the Helper comes, whom I will send to you from the Father, that is the Spirit of truth who proceeds from the Father, he will testify about me, and you will testify also because you have been with me from the beginning. Well, we'll turn to verses 26 and 27 in a later study, but I want to particularly dwell on this issue of love and hatred, the juxtaposition of love and hatred in these texts. Should have a new study guide. There's a new one available. If you haven't picked it up, you want to make sure and do so. And normally, I provide some artwork of some kind on there to remind us of the beauty of God's truth. But what I've provided to you here is a photographic image that's only a couple of months old. These are your brothers and sisters crucified. Here are a couple of your friends who are being crucified by ISIS forces. And of course, when you look at a picture like that, I trust that you find it to be repugnant. Why are they being crucified? Why were the 21 Coptic Christians from Egypt beheaded on that beach in Libya? Why are Christians in China hounded in some places? Why in Nagasaki were Jesuit missionaries, 16 of them crucified centuries ago, that effectively put a stop to the Christian evangelization of Japan for a great long time? What is the impulse? What is the impulse to violently oppose the faith? Well, let's put this in the context where it's arising. Jesus is saying, they hated me. Who is the they? If they hated me, they'll hate you. Don't be surprised at that. Who's the they? Who hated Jesus? Was it the Romans? No. Who hated Joseph? his brothers. His brothers. And their rejection of him led to their own salvation. And do you remember, after Joseph's brothers come back to him, and they don't recognize him. It says they didn't recognize him, but he recognized them. And they fulfill the dream, don't they? They bow down to Joseph. And then Joseph begins to weep, doesn't he? And he embraces them, and he says, I'm Joseph, you're my brothers. And he welcomes them in his arms, and he cares for them. Can I ask you a question? Is that how you'd have responded to your relatives who did that to you? My. But Joseph did, because he's prefiguring for us the greater Joseph, the ultimate Joseph, who's rejected by his brothers, who is hated without a cause, who is sold, who is consigned to the pit and forgotten, but then rises again after he interprets the bread and the wine, and then comes to rule over the Gentiles and save the whole world. And in saving the whole world, he saves his own brothers who rejected him. The earliest Christians were all Jews, and it was their own friends, their own neighbors, their own brothers who rejected them. So you're saying, well, is this about the Jews? Well, no, only historically is it about the ancient Jewish community, particularly the Jewish leadership, the temple leadership in particular, as you know, with Caiaphas and Annas and so on. It's hard for us in a post-Holocaust society where, and frankly, a post-Crusade society, when Christians have been the ones persecuting Jews, to think about a time in history when Jews were persecuting Christians. It's almost impossible to talk about. It feels like you're being blasphemous to even talk that way. But all the first Christians were Jews. It was a while before Gentiles started coming in. And the most pointed opposition to the early disciples of Jesus was from their brothers and sisters within the Jewish community. And that persecution was not the kind of thing that was just like, well, let's have a discussion about this. Well, it turned violent. It turned violent. And who's the first Christian martyr? Stephen. Right. Is he put to death by the Romans? Well, no. It's a mob in Jerusalem. And who's standing there holding the robes of the people doing the stoning? Well, that's Paul, or the future Paul. It's Saul of Tarsus. And he hears Stephen say words that are very similar to what Jesus said on the cross. Jesus said, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. Stephen, as he's dying, his last prayer is, Lord, don't hold this sin to their charge. So he dies not with vengeance on his lips, but with what on his lips? Mercy, forgiveness. Not grant me justice, but grant them mercy. Grant them mercy. And of course, this leads ultimately to the conversion of Saul of Tarsus, who becomes Paul the Apostle. And so this act of mercy, Jesus forgiving from the cross, loving in spite of the hatred. Stephen loving in spite of the hatred, following in the footsteps of Jesus, is what wins the hearts. And it's vital for us to understand then who we are with our neighbors. So I want to pause here for just a second and take it now from that historic context of your neighbors, their neighbors, to your neighbors. And I want to talk to you about, for just a second, being a missionary people. You see these people crucified here. These are your fellow Christians. They lived in a part of the world which is where the faith was once massive. You know, in the year 900, the largest Christian city in the world was Baghdad. Okay? The metropolitan of the Christians in Baghdad had over 900 archbishops under him. Now, to put that in context, how many archbishoprics were there in the year 900 and to this very day in England that we would tend to think of as at some point in history, the kind of hotbed of Christianity. Well, how many? 2. That's it. Canterbury and York. That's it. Just 2. Baghdad, 900 that spread all over Asia. But the Christian church over the centuries, and particularly after the 14th century, was hugely diminished through persecution. You sometimes hear it said, and they're quoting Tertullian, that the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. Sometimes that's true. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes the persecution is the wiping out of the church for centuries. Sometimes the persecution is indirect. Sometimes it's precisely because of the faith, and sometimes it's just because you're in the way. So Genghis Khan and so on sweeps across, the continents. And then you have the barbarian invasions of Europe that wipe out whole areas. And Europe has to be re-evangelized. And it was. Europe was re-evangelized too. How was Europe re-evangelized? Well, it was largely re-evangelized by Irish monks. Isn't that great? How did they become believers? Well, they became believers. You know the story of Patrick. Now, how did all that get going? Well, Patrick was captured, taken as a slave over to Ireland. He was Welsh. He's taken over there. Well, say Welsh, but that part of the British Isles. He's taken over to Ireland. He's a slave. While he's a slave, he's converted. He comes really to the fullness of faith that his mother and father had always owned. And he manages after some years to escape. So he comes back home. When he gets back home, he has the Lord put into his heart, in whatever way that he did, do what? Go back to the people who made you a slave. Go back to the people who would have killed you for escaping. Go back to those people. Go back to the people who, if you show up, they'll put you to death. Go back to those people. How do you appreciate there was no search committee for that call? There were no negotiations about how's the salary and benefits package going to be, None of that happened. Just go over there to these people who hate you and preach the gospel to them. And so he did. He did. He went to people who hated him and he loved them. And over the course of a generation, the Christian faith spread across Ireland, and they became deeply missionary people. Columba and others carried the gospel. The Irish, some of you are going, where is this in the study guide? Okay, but see, this is why we do this. It's not in the study guide. Okay, the Irish believed there were 3 kinds of martyrdom. There was the red martyrdom, the white martyrdom, and the green martyrdom. Now, the red martyrdom was you died. You died. You shed your blood. And the Irish were worried, really, really worried, because Ireland was one of the places where Christianity swept in and swept across the island and became a dominant faith, and there were never any martyrs. Nobody ever died. So it's like one of the few places in Europe you can go where Christianity spread and there were never any martyrs. And they felt a little disconcerted about that. They couldn't point to any martyrs, like some of their heroes. We don't have any real heroes here. So that's why they invented these other martyrdoms, the white martyrdom and the green martyrdom. The white martyrdom was you couldn't talk again. You just took a vow of silence. But they were Irish. That didn't work. No one could do it, right? Who could do that? And my middle name's Patrick, and my last name's Cassidy. I get it, okay? No, not happening. So then there was the green martyrdom, and the green martyrdom it meant you had to leave Ireland. You had to leave, and go take the gospel somewhere else, because if you left Ireland, that's as good as what? That's as good as dying. Oh, dear. To leave Ireland, to be sure. So, but it's interesting, see, when Patrick got there and he began spreading the faith, the Celtic tribesmen had these big leather belts. And to show their manhood and their leadership, they wore signs on their belts of their standing. And what they did is they had on their leather belts skulls. Okay, that's what they had hanging from their leather belts. And so, it's kind of like notches on the gun. It's how many skulls you had on your belt. But the Irish monks, when they went back over to Europe to re-evangelize Europe, guess what they had hanging from their belts? Books. Books. And they brought education, and they brought care, and they brought medicine, and they brought learning. And they built these little Christian communities that became centers of learning. And by being neighbors, they brought the gospel again to these areas that had to be re-evangelized completely because they'd been overrun by paganism. So what's this got to do with us? What it has to do with us is this. God always puts Christians with neighbors who need Christ. But that does not mean that they will be appreciative of you. Some of your neighbors will hate you without a cause. Now, see, there's a fundamental assumption that's mistaken here in the Bible Belt, and that is that everybody who lives around here is a Christian. Okay? That's not true. Have you noticed? Okay, and you go, yeah, there are some people who moved here on my block from Massachusetts. No, there's actually some native-born Tennesseans who may not actually be Christians. I know it's hard to believe, all right? So some of you have heard me tell the story about when I got to Kentucky from London. Moved there the first week I was there. I was sitting in a Hardee's in this little town in western Kentucky and looked over at a guy kind of at the little plastic table across from me, and I said, "Are you a Christian?" And he said, "Hell yes." I was born in Kentucky. What else could I be, You didn't expect me to be a Buddhist, right? What's wrong with you? Hell yes. So there's a lot of hell yeah Christians in Kentucky and Tennessee. I get it, all right? They still need Jesus. But do you know that there are a lot of people, your neighbors, your friends, who are antagonistic to the faith, not just ignorant of the faith. They are antagonistic to it. They're antagonistic to the notion of the church. Some of that's because they've been hurt by the church. Some of that is because they've been, they're really turned off the way the church communicates the truth about the gospel. They don't want to listen in the language that's being spoken. So there's a lot of different reasons for that. But if you get up in the morning, if you get up in the morning and you think of yourself as a missionary person, you'll get up differently. See, if you got up tomorrow morning, if you woke up as a Christian in Afghanistan, how would your life be different as a Christian? Could be hiding. Could be a lot of people angry with you. How would you conduct yourself? And what would your whole life be about? If you knew you lived with people who didn't know Jesus at all, how would you view your work? What if you lived in a city of millions of people in China? How would you view your own life? You're a Christian. What's the purpose of your work? What's the purpose of your family? What's the purpose of your hours, your entertainment? What is it? What is all that? Why am I here? What is God doing with you? But see, you would know if you woke up in a place that was not necessarily sympathetic to and possibly quite antagonistic to the gospel. If you woke up in a place where you knew the vast majority of the people weren't Christians, you would go, the reason I have a job and the reason I live in this house and the reason our family is here is because we're here so that other people learn about Jesus. So every part of my work and the way I treat my neighbors, all of those things are really all about sharing Christ with people because I'm a missionary. One of the problems with the church in America is we stopped being missionaries. We thought being missionaries meant going to another country. Now, it's great to go to other countries, but we have to get back to this idea that where we live, we are missionaries. Now, I said this to the staff. And when I say this in January, you all have to go, oh, wow, that was, man, I've never heard that before. All right? So you get this preview of coming attractions, okay? I said this to the staff this week. I know that this church does not expect anybody to get saved in this church. And all the staff looked at me like, what? I said, well, we don't. I know we don't. I know we don't. And here's how I know. Here's how I know. The reason I know is because of this. If you take a young couple here and they're going to have a baby, what do they prepare in their house? A nursery. And even though there's no baby there yet, they're getting like furniture all set. They got the crib all going on, and they're getting special curtains hung, and they got toys and all kinds of stuff going on, and they're buying music and all this kind of thing. And if one of their neighbors came over and went, oh, hey, what do you got going on here? Well, this is the nursery. Well, that's kind of crazy. You don't have a baby. You say, well, yeah, but we're what? We're expecting one, and so we're getting everything ready. See, there's no nursery here. You go, well, what's the nursery? Okay, well, let me put it this way. If this Sunday, somehow, miraculously, anybody got saved, what piece of literature is it that you're putting in their hands from this church that tells them what it means to be a believer? Any takers? I've been here a year and a half now and can't find anything. Nothing. Nothing. Everything that most of the churches in this area do, everything is designed for people who are already Christians to transfer their membership. See, that's why I'm the pastor here. I just get to say stuff. And then you can all be mad at me. Most churches are competitors in a membership market rather than co-belligerents in a battle with hell for souls. I'm not in a battle with Fellowship for members. I'm not in a battle with any other church for members, with Church of the City or First Baptist or whatever it is. We're co-belligerents in a battle with Satan for the souls of people. And every single person sitting in this room is a missionary. We just didn't realize it. Because we could sit in this comfortable culture of faux Christendom, this little bubble of the Bible Belt, thinking that everybody kind of believes what we believe. Well, guess what? You know what a lot of people in the Bible Belt are waking up to in the morning? Not just coffee, but the sudden discovery that not everybody believes what they believe, whether it's about sexual ethics or the authority of Scripture or even the need for a church, even if they are Christians. Welcome to the 21st century, sports fans. So, you are going to live among people who will sometimes, not always, but sometimes, hate you. So my question is, when you encounter opposition, antagonism, hatred, real opposition, what are you going to do? Because that's what this passage is about. Now, these guys got hung on a cross. What are we going to do? This comes back to whether or not we understand how loved we are. Let's look at chapter 15, verse 9. As the Father has loved me, I have also loved you. I think you could spend the rest of your life meditating on just that verse. Listen to what Jesus said. I have loved you with the very same love with which the Father has loved me. Now suppose you had this essay assignment. Please explain the depths of the love of God the Father for God the Son. Could you even begin to penetrate that mystery? The love between God the Father and God the Son. How deep is that love? How vast? How abiding? How unbreakable is that bond? The love of God the Father for God the Son. Jesus gets baptized. Spirit descends. A voice comes out of heaven and says, this is my beloved. This is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased. That's the love of the Father for the Son. Because it involves the persons of the Trinity, it is a mystery which cannot be fathomed. And Jesus says, that same love of the Father for me is the love I have for you. Permanent, beyond measure, incalculable, a bond that can never be severed. That's why Paul later will write in Romans chapter 8, I am convinced that neither life, nor death, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come, and so on, will ever be able to, what? Separate us from the love of God, which is in Christ Jesus our Lord. Nothing can separate you from this love. This is the love with which you've been loved. So if you know you are loved like that, what does that free you to do? See, if you already know your position is completely secure, you're totally forgiven, you're totally loved, it's an unbreakable bond, then if somebody comes to you and goes, but I don't love you, okay, should that rattle your world? It doesn't have to. See, it's kind of like you're in this position of being so deeply loved that anyone else's hatred can't come up to it. It can't rattle it, can't measure it. When people are rattled by the lack of love from other people, it's because they still need more love to fill their hearts. So I'm looking for that love from you because I need you to fill this up. But if the love of God, that love of God is so powerful, so all-consuming, so abiding, you are His beloved. You are the beloved. You're the beloved of God. When that is in you, and it is so deeply in you, then if somebody else just doesn't like you, not only does it not rattle you, you can what with them? You could love them and be kind to them, even when they're unkind to you. You can forgive them when they sin against you. Because you are not relating to them in terms of what you can get from them. You don't relate to your neighbors now in terms of what you can get from them. You relate to your neighbors now as missionary people, as a light of Jesus where you live, in your work, the way you do your house, the way everything happens. You're not there to take advantage of your neighbors. You're not there to oppose. You're there simply to love your neighbors. Love your neighbors. Well, who's my neighbor? You remember how that story went, don't you? Right? So this is a wide spectrum of people. The Christian community has always responded this way. So Henri de Lubac, in his book Ecclesia Mater, Mother Church, wrote, out of the eternal community of the Holy Trinity emerges the same agape that is lavished on the creatures that bear this image of the Creator God. So out of the communion of the Holy Trinity, the same love that the persons of the Trinity have for one another, this love is now poured out on you. And this love leads us to a place of obedience. Why do people want to obey God? Why do Christians want to please God? It's because of fear, right? He's going to get you. Well, there are people who really raised that way. You might have been raised that way. But that's not what Jesus teaches. Jesus teaches that obedience arises from love. not from fear. In fact, John writes that perfect love casts out fear over in his epistle. So if you look at this in verse 12, this is my commandment that you love one another just as I have loved you. All right? So loved, you become the beloved. And he says, you're my friends if you do what I command you. No longer do I call you slaves. I call you what? Friends. So there's a belovedness in our relationship with Christ, and that leads to our obeying his commands. Do you want to please your spouse out of fear or out of love? If you're in love with someone, then you're trying to find ways to please them. You're trying to discover ways to make them happy. You love them. And so you're like, I wonder what I can do to kind of really let them know about this love. And so it's not like, oh man, I better come up with a nice dinner or she's going to kill me, right? How many know that if the relationship has gotten to that point, it's based on fear, counseling is really, really right at hand. Okay, you're going to need some help with that because you don't want to relate to each other based and rooted in fear, but based and rooted in what? Real love, because you delight in each other. God doesn't want you to obey him out of fear. He wants you to obey him because of the great love he's poured into your life. You did not choose me, verse 16. I chose you and I appointed you that you would, now I need you to say this next expression with me, that you would go and bear fruit. Would you say that? That you would go and bear fruit. Verse 16. Don't miss the word go. You cannot be a Christian and bearing fruit without being a Christian who's going. This is being the missionary people, going and bearing fruit. We've got to get this in our heads. We've somehow got to get this in our heads that God has placed us in our society and in this time in history among our neighbors because he is sending us to go. You'll hear this word from me all the time over the next couple of years. We are missional people. All right, I'll just put it to you this way. That God does not have a church with a mission. God has a mission with a church. He is redeeming the cosmos through the sacrifice of his son Jesus. And Jesus has made the bride his own, and he has put this church here. And this church is here to bear witness of the Father's love and to bring the good news of Jesus and to announce the presence of the kingdom of God. And that kingdom should grow in all the world. And so it's vital for us to grasp this, to say that, okay, we've been placed in this world, and this means that to go and bear fruit, to go and make disciples, does not mean that you have to buy an airfare. Now you can, there's nothing wrong with that. God has called some people to do that. Whether it's short-term or long-term missions, there's nothing wrong with any of that. I'm not talking against it. All of that's great. But it is no use going across an ocean to talk to people who, if they lived across the street from you, you would despise. Why would you go all the way over there and go, oh, look, we built them a house, if you won't cross the street and build a house for people in your own town who have just as much need? But you'll pat yourself on the back because you went to some other place and did it. When your own neighbors are in this terrible predicament. What kind of Christianity is that? It's nuts Christianity. It's crazy Christianity. It's Christianity that only exists in our age because we have things called airplanes. The ancient Christians didn't do that, did they? Where did they do their stuff? Right there. They were on the move, among the people where they lived. So this is the fruit the Father looks for. And it's love for one another. What's the command that we're to obey? The new commandment, it's that you might love one another. As the Father has loved me, I have loved you. As I have loved you, love one another. What is that love? Verse 13, greater love has no one than this, than one lay down his life for his friends. So what does love look like? Love is self-giving. C.S. Lewis said, humility is not thinking less of yourself, it is thinking of yourself less. I'm not talking about a kind of self-loathing. We're actually talking about the knowledge that you're the beloved of God, and because you're the beloved of God, you are loved, you are cherished, you've been died for, God has sacrificed everything for you, then you can die for others. You can give yourself to others. And when other people hate you, you can forgive them. When other people curse you, you can bless them. Isn't that what Jesus taught? And this means that we are missionary people every single day, wherever we live, right here, right now. And this makes us the friends of God. I have not called you servants, I called you friends. So, this is the context of mission, and that's why prayer has to be contextualized this way. In verse 16, you did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you that you should go and bear fruit, that your fruit should remain, so that whatever you ask of the Father in my name, he may give to you. So what happens is a lot of people read a verse, ask whatever you want. Oh Lord, won't you buy me a Mercedes-Benz? All my friends drive Porsches, I must make amends. So we pray the great prayer of Janis Joplin. And then we wonder, why does God not answer our prayers? But the prayer, ask whatever you want, is in the, ask me whatever you need, I'll get it for you, is in the context of the mission, go and bear fruit. So you've heard me use this illustration before, but I'll mention it to you again in case you weren't there that day. And it goes like this. If my dad takes me out on a Saturday morning, I'm, 14 years old, and he hands me a couple big white cans of paint and a paintbrush, and he says, you see that fence? Paint it. Here's a bottle of water. You got your brush, got your paint. I'll be back. If you need anything, what? Call me. I'll get it to you. Dad gets 15 minutes down the road, and I call him up. Hey, Dad, I need a pizza. Now, what did my dad mean by, if you need anything, call me? If you need anything for what? The job he sent me to do. It's not if you want anything to just make your life easier, make your life shinier, make it all better. That's not what this prayer promise is about. This prayer promise is about whatever you need to get the job done, ask me and I'll give it to you. Let me put it in a literal, contextual Christian mission. How many appreciate that Billy Graham, at the height of his ministry, kind of going old school on this, Billy Graham, at the height, the zenith of his evangelistic ministry, filling up stadiums, had a bigger budget than Christ Community Church? Right? And did he need it? Yeah, because if you want to rent Yankee Stadium, you're going to have to write a check. And if you're going to fly teams of people to other countries, and you're going to feed thousands of people, okay, so do you think they prayed for that? Yes. And here again, I'm going to get on your case a little bit. One of the reasons churches have puny budgets is because we have puny prayers. And we have puny prayers because we have puny missions. We have pygmy missions. Little dinky little missions instead of giant visions. What if God said, I want this church to have a 747 so it could do its work? And see, I'm just being crazy tonight. Because some of you look like, is he going to bring that up with the finance committee? I mean, what is he on about? What is he talking about? Okay, now you see, here's what you got to know. This is what you got to know. I would have no problem showing up in here on a Sunday morning, and I'm not talking about going all Creflo Dollar on you, I need $60 million for my private jet. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about if this church, whatever this church needs to do what? The work God gave it to do, the fence he gave you to paint, then that's what we should be asking for. My problem is most churches think God wants them to, wash a couple dishes. And that's about the extent of their mission. There's a huge, huge world to win. So we should be asking great things of our great God. Look, you want to pray for Aunt Harriet's cousin's cat that swallowed a hairball? I'm fine with praying for cats. That's all. Well, not really, but okay. So I get it. And you know, and listen, I appreciate that in God, there's no big ones, little ones. Like if we came to God and we said, you know, like, well, I didn't want to pray about that because it was kind of a small thing. Like God would ever look at something, anything we prayed for and went, I don't know, that's a big one. So I get it. I'm not despising personal prayers about personal concerns. But I am trying to elevate us to think about communal, missional concerns. What this church is supposed to do in this city and in this world. God is not going to give us what we need just to pat ourselves on the back so that we all feel better about each other. He wants to do something among us that makes us effective in this world, in this culture, in this society. And that's going to be big, and it's going to be daring, and it's going to be borderline crazy. We were at New Hope Academy a week and a half ago. How many of you were here for the beginning of New Hope Academy? Were you in the church at that point? All right. So we're there. I'd heard all about the folks who started that, but it's the first time I'd been in the school, and I heard the story firsthand from some of the people who were right there standing up. And I'm listening to Paige Overton Pitts, who I've heard so many wonderful things about, but never met her. And there she is standing there telling the story about how she stood up in church and she said, hey, why don't we do this school? Okay, why don't we do this? It's an audacious vision. You know what? Your days of audacious visions are not over. They're not over. They're just beginning. I don't know what the next ones are. I don't know what they are. But if Dale Jameson stands up one Sunday and goes, hey, why don't we, God just put this in my heart, why don't we buy a 747 and take medical teams to Chile instead of Chile to a cook-off? Because that's about the extent of most churches' missions. What if he did that? I mean, that's something crazy. You up for that? Just going, oh man, let's do that. Let's do that. Just whatever it is. Okay, so ask whatever you wish, and it'll be done for you. All right, in the context of the mission. Okay, so when we do this, we are at times going to be loved, and at times we are going to be hated. If the world hates you. What does he mean by the world? Well, world, the meaning of the word world, the Greek word is cosmos. It means an order, cosmos. It's where the word cosmetics comes from. It's the opposite of chaos. It's cosmos. So, if you need makeup, that's its purpose. It moves things from chaos to cosmos, right? That's cosmetics, right? That's what it's all about. Okay, just saying. That's where the word comes from. Just your word study for the evening, all right? Just having fun. Okay. So what it's all about is a system. It's systematizing something. And he's saying if the system hates you, the system hated me first. It's the antithesis. And the antithesis is real, and it has to be embraced. Spirituality is not an escape from the world, but it is perseverance in the world by our mission to the world. And on your study guide, you might want to just get your highlighter on that. Spirituality is not an escape from the world, but perseverance in the world by our mission to the world. I just want to close with a couple of things here. A lot of Christians they go, I want to connect. I want to have some relationships, Okay, let me tell you one of the best ways to build relationships in the Christian community. Go on a mission. Do something. I'm going to tell you right now, you can build some relationships in a small group. That's great. Nothing wrong with that. But you want to really connect with some people, go do the mission. I promise you, you get yourself into a situation where miraculous stuff has to happen for you to have a deliverance, you will get to know those people. Like if you're in a situation where an exorcism has to take place, okay, you'll get to know who your friends are. And you'll be telling those stories for years. You will connect. You will connect. You and I are missionary people. And one of the reasons that we don't see the power of God in the church today is because we keep expecting God to show up in the church service for the fireworks. When God expects the world to show up in the church, He expects the church to show up in the world, and that's where the fireworks happen. To get out of here. So we come in here, we get nourished, we get fed, we get equipped, we go live. We go live the faith. We go, we're missional people, and we will see God's power in the world. That's where it's going to happen. That's where it's going to happen. That's the mistake of all of the meetings that are like, here's the faith healer, come forward, feel the power, all that stuff. That's trying to get God, it's trying to manipulate God into doing something in here when the biblically speaking, the power of God is in the streets. And it's God's people going out into the world. All right, well, let me stop there and see what questions you have or other comments that you want to make on that this evening. Yeah. 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 And see, and here's the thing I want most people, you're already out there. We got to wake up to, you're there. You don't actually have to go do anything special except be aware of the fact that I'm a missionary. Wake up tomorrow morning as a missionary. Get this, y'all don't even need to raise any support. You don't have to apply to MTW. You're in the field. If every Christian in America woke up tomorrow morning realizing they were a missionary, it would change the church dramatically. Right away. So that's, and you get up believing God. Hey, God, what are you going to do today? Right. Others? Yeah, Richard.
Those who are take the love of God all the way the other way. God would never do anything bad.
Yeah.
So we have to guard against that.
Yeah, there are people who misunderstand the love of God and they divorce it from any sense of justice or anger. I think Nate did a good job for us on that a couple of Sundays ago. If you saw a child being abused and it didn't make you angry and you didn't hate the evil, then really who's the person with the problem? Yeah, you got a problem. If you see somebody being wounded and you're not angry about it and you're not taking action about that. So to say, well, God's love, so he won't do anything associated with harshness, displeasure, anger, that kind of thing, is to deeply, deeply misunderstand what love is all about. Yeah. Chris?
There's a book that's getting passed around to some of the Christians within my neighborhood in West Haven by Jay Patek and Dave Runyon. It's called The Art of Neighboring.
The Art of Neighboring.
The Art of Neighboring. And it basically starts out saying, hey, we say love your neighbor as yourself. And we think, okay, that means love other people as you love yourself. You know, they say love your neighbor, like the guy who lives
Right there, that guy.
when you walk out your door and go next door, you even know their kid's name.
Yeah.
And so they start out by, draw this 9x9 grid and write in the names of the people who live there. If you don't know them, go find them out.
Yeah.
And then just throw block parties.
Yes.
And you don't have to.
Yes.
You don't have to play, Christian contemporary music at your block parties. You can have beer. Get to know them because
Yes.
then they get to know a Christian.
Yes, that's right. Oh, we have Christian beer. It's made by monks. It's right. It's from the Black Abbey. It's made by Protestant monks at the Black Abbey in Nashville, man. That's exactly right, baby. But it's so critical. It's absolutely critical. Pray for those folks, draw the grid, make it happen. That's exactly right. Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, sir.
I find out you go to church after event. Now, are you religious?
Yes, right? Yeah. How do you answer that? There you go. That's a good answer. That's a good answer. Yeah, people don't use, they don't necessarily have the vocabulary for the whole thing, so. But always respond in kindness. Always respond with prayer. Always respond with blessing. That's all good. All right, well, we got to go, and tomorrow night the seniors are gathering. Where's that happening, Dave?
It is happening by the river at the cross.
By the river at the cross. Shall we gather at the river? Okay, all right, so that's happening. All right, what time?
Do you have anything left tomorrow night?
Man, I better have something in the tank. I'll tell you stories about Irish monks, I guess. That would be kind of cool, you know. I'll save something. What time is that happening?
Begins at 5:30.
5:30. All right, everybody. Hey, yeah, sorry? Whoa, I'm not answering that question, man. No, you are in such big trouble. You're fired. Anyway. All right, let's go in grace. Amen.